So when people come in, then I'm a little hesitant to bow to each person because then I might miss someone, so I'm bowing to all of you. And I discovered a few days ago that all of you means all of you and your ancestors and your descendants and their descendants. And so it's 80,000 people. So I'm bowing again. And first of Robin, yes, that's great. So that's a message for Robin. And now an announcement about next week. We're going to have Buddha's birthday, and in place of the Dharma talk. And you look for your email about more information about that. But it will be outside, and I hope it will be quite beautiful. And I wasn't going to read this morning the daily quote for Sunday, April 4th, but it fit perfectly what I'm going to talk about, and that is silence is unceasing eloquence. It is the best language. And that seems to be a continuing theme in the koans. And then as I was sitting, I remembered something a creative writing teacher told me in college. Listen to everyone, believe no one. And then at 11:54 a.m., Trouty sent me an email, p.m., last night. And a friend of hers interpreted the very short version of this koan. And in Chinese, as Buddha picks up flower, Kashaba smiles. But there was a lot of information in these 5 words. It was actually done in 5 words. One is to pick up or hold with fingers. And I mentioned that to my wife this morning. And she said, doesn't everyone do things with fingers? And I said, no. She was like Craftsman of the Year, and she's been a life of pottery and tea ceremony. So fingers are really important to artists, but not everyone uses fingers. And even in our mudra, it's about fingers. And then she said that all the movements in tea ceremony are circular, not straight. And as I was sitting, I was thinking about that and how the difference between shaking your hand and putting your arm around someone. So putting your arm around someone is a motion like this. Shaking is straight, and it's not quite as nice. Let's put it that way. And then Nancy, who lived in Vietnam, said she just did some research and found that the koan that I'm been working with was in a book that literally had the title, The Brahma King Asks the Buddha to Doubt the Sutras. And that continues the whole idea that these sutras need to be doubted. And I think it's unique to, unique to some religions and not to others, where you doubt the sutras. And I once saw the whole Pali Canon at a Burmese monastery here in Austin. And I was thinking about that when I was sitting today too, that it was about the size of the Encyclopedia Britannica, that many volumes. And then at one point, Buddha said, I have said no words. So we have that wonderful comparison of all those words and no words. Oh, and the other thing I was thinking about, 2 more things. One is the smile, according to Trouty's friend, you only show with lips, no sound, not even showing teeth. So this smile is not an outward smile, but kind of an inward smile. And in some people who write about this koan, they say it was a broad smile, other a subtle smile, but it was interesting that you just show your lips, no sound, not even showing teeth. I really like that. So, and the fact that there were 80,000 monks there and Buddha caught Kashaba smiling, this really faint smile, is pretty neat. Okay. So now I'm going to go to, oh, not quite yet, to my pictures, but I have a few more things to say. I've been living with a simple koan. Each zazen period, it is on my mind, and on good days in my body. And then I make a drawing. That's been my way of seeing and feeling what is inside me. But I think I give the wrong impression when I bypass why I am here in Buddhism in the first place, and when I forget what this Buddhism thing is really about. I am somewhere between being lost and being entertained at those times. The main tenet of Buddhism is to end suffering. As I'm now reading this, I realize that main is problematic. That suggests there are other tenets. I'm not sure that is helpful. So I've been thinking about this idea. I mean, it was so clear Buddha wanted to end suffering, and what does that mean? And if I asked each of you, like some area where you're suffering, when you are suffering, usually something's bad has happened and you wish it hadn't happened. So it's kind of neutralizing the bad thing. So I'm feeling pain. The pain ends. You think that that's suffering end, but it really, there's dukkha, which is suffering, and then there's sutta, which is the end of suffering, not suffering, nirvana. And that's really means joy and happiness. So where our suffering might be one, and ending that, or the pain might be one, and then the ending of pain is three, we're talking about five. So if we don't, we're not getting there to this joy and happiness. We're not really ending suffering. And well, I like thinking about that in my life, I think I've been trying just to end suffering in the kind of literal sense where I don't feel the pain anymore. And that's not what this is about. Suffering or dukkha has been described as a wheel out of kilter. To repair the wheel from going bumpity, we slow down and then adjust each spoke so they are the same length. Maybe we even add a little rubber to the rim, and if we work hard, we can fill the rubber with some air. Can we even smooth out the road? And that's our big delusion, isn't it? Maybe not in the human realm, when there is always a disconnect between life as we'd like it to be and life as it is. Ending suffering is the whole business. It's easy to forget. So that's what I'm saying is a little deceptive. So why did Buddha hold up a flower? The answer to all Buddhist questions is the same: to end suffering. That's the work of the Bodhisattva. Taking on that work, ending suffering for ourselves and others, is the job at hand. So how does holding up a flower end suffering? For that, we look at the cause of suffering, attachment. What are we attached to? Why did Kashaba smile? Those are my current questions. They are not where I started. Here's my journey from the past month with the koan that was originally concisely expressed with 5 words: pick up flower, subtle smile. Buddha held up a flower and Kashaba smiled. A man lived in a grass hut for 26 years and became enlightened. Today, when I sat, I imagined I was in the stupor of simplicity. I thought both of these stories were about utter simplicity. And then I was reminded that Vimalakirti, a brilliant lay donor to the Buddha, also was in a similar 10 by 10 room and assembled 40,000 and gods, which suggests that I need to return to the cushion and realize that within this simplicity, there must be a great deal of confusion. And here's poor man who can't enter his own hut because there's 40,000 plus gods in it. And it was filled with all his ancestral teachers, which I've come to realize is everywhere we look. Buddha held up a flower. Sometimes it is depicted as a pure white lotus, but I like it better when it is a lotus with its roots dripping mud. That's who I was today when I led service and messed up on the robe chant. There were hopefully some moments where the beautiful end of the flower was revealed, but the mud was there as well. The point is not to be a stone Buddha, nor to be a wild animal. It is the pure white lotus and the mud, all in one bundle. That's why Kashaba smiled, or not. Cousin Brian wrote, he held up all flowers everywhere. When I imagine those that know this story of Buddha holding up the flower, I can see all flowers being held up simultaneously throughout space and time. Not only am I holding up a lotus, but so did those who preceded me, as did my children and their children. Flowers filled the room. Flowers filled outside the room as far as Kashaba could see. There was nothing but flowers. As a Boy Scout, I worshiped the Be Prepared motto. It was my way to deal with life. The wannabe monks at the flower sermon were well prepared. They knew the Dharma and had a solid meditation practice. Yet when Buddha admired the flower, their preparedness blocked their transmission. But what about Kashaba? His mind was open and fertile. Buddha transmitted with him because Kashaba didn't have any expectations. He was fortunately underprepared. That's virtuosity. I'm planning to show my progress in figuring out this koan. She corrected me, saying we don't really make progress. Rather, we illuminate jewels. This connects to Connie's way of walking through the woods. She doesn't walk to get any place. Rather, she walks to walk, to feel the earth under her feet, to see the trees in front of her, and to follow the clouds moving through the sky. Is that progress? The flower sermon is not only a koan, but a Chinese folk tale. In the folk tale, we see Buddha reaching into the muck and pulling out the flower, dripping mud. He then asks each monk to expound on the meaning of the flower, what it symbolized, and how it fit into Buddha's teaching. Kashaba not only smiles, but laughs when he is shown the flower. Buddha then tells his disciples, what can be said, I have said to you, and what cannot be said, I have given to Kashaba. Yikes! This is exactly what the koan means, and it wouldn't be a koan if there wasn't much more, which there is. Kashaba smiled faintly, broadly, or not only smiled, but laughed when Buddha held up the flower and winked. Many memories here. Was this an enlightenment moment for Kashaba? Was his reaction purely spontaneous to the white flower?
Did thoughts race through his head as he heard or imagined the other monks dissecting the flower with their well-trained discursive minds? Did he have any ambition to be Buddha's successor? How does one prepare for a special moment when they need to just get it? How is it that Buddha taught for 45 years and yet chose the student with the smile rather than the one with the brilliant discourse? And here you have 80,000 monks were there. One monk got it. Oh, there's my friendly cockroach. Every day Buddha holds up a flower. We have a line in one of our chants, life as it is, the only teacher, suggesting that Buddha is holding up a white flower at every moment. Just look, anywhere. How do I respond? What do I say when someone tells me a dark, deep secret? How do I respond to the giant cockroach who has found its way to our kitchen? Am I so attached to my preferences that I feel nothing for her? Do I consider her life and her hunger? Do I appreciate that she was on earth millenniums before I was? Can I gently rub her back? This koan is from 1,000 years ago, but really is about this time being. Our cockroach is held by Buddha. She is a white flower. How might I respond? Media, you've done a great job at describing the muddy water. This morning, however, as we sat in the cloud, I smiled at the beautiful flower portrayed in the 15 of us, including you, sitting so peacefully in the cloud Zeno. Out of the muck, beautiful things arise. That is what can warm our hearts and remind us, as Shelley wrote, if winter comes, can spring be far behind? Science debates whether there was a time before there was time. Dogen, 1200 to 1253, talked of being time, suggesting that time is an entity rather than just a measurement. Kashaba and Buddha both lived 2,500 years ago. That's time as measurement. But Buddha and Kashaba are just as alive today as are our deceased parents. Zen Master Keizan wrote, beginningless and endless, beyond the passage of time, the transmission of the treasury of the eye of truth will still be there. Kashapa's smile did not come and go. If so, it would not penetrate our souls as it has for thousands of years. It is time being. There may have been a being time before Kashapa smiled, but never a being time when his smile ended. There is a Buddha before Buddha Jataka tale where Buddha reads the mind of the pirate and sees that he's planning to kill all the people on the boat. Throwing to the wind his own karma, Buddha kills the pirate. Buddha believes those who will be killed are at no karmic risk, as the pirate is. So he kills the pirate to save him of karmic consequences. We need friends like that, don't we? In a similar way, Buddha's big gift and teaching was to the 80,000 monks whom he didn't choose to be his successor, not to Kashapa. Despite their disappointment for not being Buddha's successor, they were given a priceless lesson. The Dharma is not the Dharma. Words do not express the Dharma. Smiling at a flower is the Dharma, or not. There's another koan, Nansen kills a cat. Here Nansen holds up a cat and says, if you can say a word of Zen, I will spare the cat. Like the monks in the flower sermon, they were all speechless. Again, it was their uncertainty the monks had that cost them dearly, this time with the life of the cat. Or maybe there are no words of Zen, and the monks knew that. Later in the koan, Joshu put his sandal on his head after hearing the story, perhaps as a way of opening his heart to the cat's fate. Were the monks tongue-tied, or did they Or were they astute in realizing that words of Zen really don't exist? In the flower sermon, maybe the 80,000 monks without a word were close but no cigar. Did they know there was no conventional response to the flower? It was not in their textbook. What they didn't know was what to do then. And the consequences was quite serious. Even if no cat died, they missed an opportunity to be Buddha's disciple. Suzuki Roshi equated small mind with monkey mind. Was he saying that we should, if we could, have an exorcism of our small mind? He also said that we are perfect just as we are and we could stand a little improvement. Maybe he was simply describing rather than condemning. As in the flower sermon, we meet 80,000 monks, all who want to be Buddha's successor, all with perfectly highly nurtured Dharma minds. Maybe this learning is another facet of small mind that separates us from the boundless and free big mind. Or maybe, like with the tea lady who simultaneously quotes and shuns the Diamond Sutra, it is the attachment to the Dharma that is the problem. When Buddha held up a flower and the monks were speechless, it was really their Dharma mind that was speechless, as perfect as it was. I heard that Zen is good for nothing. Can we say the same about Dharma mind? Perfect, but could stand a little improvement? Little may be a generous example of skillful means of being kind. Our practice may need more than a little improvement amid that practice, that perfection.
Buddha holds up a flower, or did he become the flower? The flower was not a conceptual idea, but rather an extension of his own compassion and love. The 80,000 monks minus one didn't digest the flower into their inner beings. Rather, their small, grasping minds were confused. They wanted to be chosen by Buddha to be his successor. They studied everything so they'd be prepared. And yet, what they had learned was quicksand. The harder they tried to figure it out, the deeper they were buried. Kashaba also learned the Dharma, but was able to hold it very gingerly. Seeing the flower, he saw both its exquisite present form, what it had been in previous lives, and what it would become as it turned to dust and went back into the earth. I don't think he was smiling at Buddha's gesture. That would suggest he wasn't touched by the flower itself. If words could have taken the place of the flower, Buddha could have simply said, "Beautiful flower." But the hand-to-hand transmission to take place, there had to be more. There had to be a flower representing life itself rather than a description of life. In an article I read about a young baseball player, I read, "He doesn't talk with his mouth, he talks with his glove and his bat." And Buddha talked with the flower, as did Kashaba. Buddha's decision to hold up a flower was entirely spontaneous, as was a brushstroke by Picasso or a note played by Pablo Casals. Buddha wasn't a newbie. He had paid his dues. For 500 lifetimes, he had been the attendant for previous Buddhas. He knew his way around the block. When Ananda stuck a blade of grass in the ground, Buddha saw that now there was a temple. There doesn't seem to be in Zen a correlation between time spent in deliberation and the quality of the action. Holding up the flower was a masterful stroke of genius, and yet it was the result of a genuine flow rather than racking one's discursive brain to come up with the perfect testing instrument. May what I do flow from me like a river. No forcing and no holding back, the way it is with children. Rainer Marie Rilke. What do you say when there is nothing to say? A tragedy strikes your friend when her loved one passes on. Whatever you want to say won't bring them back and won't comfort. And yet, if you say nothing, you worry that they'll think you didn't care. You bring them a flower, your eyes meet. Then they glance at the flower and you discern a faint smile. Did they smile at the flower? Or was it a smile at your gesture? Or was it simply a smile at the connection? Did Kashaba really smile at the flower? The flower didn't need a smile, but your friend did. Perhaps the smile was a meta smile from millions of miles away, a smile recognizing what would take more words than the sands of the Ganges to express. So when I did the drawing, I noticed there was a space between the two figures, and I'm not very comfortable with empty space. So I put a face there, and then I asked myself, who is this? And then decided it was me, that I had finally kind of stepped into the situation, joined the sermon. 65 years ago, my bike tire got caught in a crack in the middle of the paved alley in Chicago. I came home with skinned knees. My mom explained that the reason for my accident was because I wanted attention, since all the attention had been on my cousin Noah, who had died in an accident 6 months earlier. How is it that we look at what happened and are confused until we make up a story, like my mom always did? Is it ever so simple as the story suggests? Buddha holds up a flower and Kashaba smiles. Usually, when one is given a talk to 80,000 monks, they would say something. When there are no words, one makes up a story. Our minds resist resting in not knowing, so we come up with one explanation after another. But is anything that simple? Is it possible to really know? Freud believed there was a method to our madness. I wonder if his method came from an insecurity he had with not knowing. But that's my story. Statements can be seen on a continuum divided into 3 clusters, those probably true, those maybe true, and those probably false. As we frame the statement in different ways, it can move from one cluster to another. Buddha held up the flower to 80,000 monks. Vimalakirti spoke to thousands. Various Mahayana sutras also have thousands of monks. Today, there were 13 of us sitting in the cloud zendo. Maria just had her DNA tested and said she was related to 16,000 people. That makes 208,000 who were sitting in our little cloud. Wilman Wike, who lived 1,000 years ago, commented on a koan we studied last night, saying that we should be thinking of our ancestors. Those are the ones who join us in our cloud. We have the expression that he's in his head, as I am so often. How is it that this koan has been alive for 1,000 years? How is it that Kashaba, almost like a simpleton, smiles at a flower and gets the job for which others had yearned? How is it that the Buddha taught for 45 years and gave thousands of talks, yet by his own admission never said a word? How is it that sometimes I talk and never say a word? Just ask my wife. Enough of this, Buddha said. I'm going to not say something that won't be forgotten. And then he held up a flower. This is my last piece for the Dharma talk number 1. My journey has been short, less than a month. The Israelites journeyed for 40 years. Many who started the journey did not complete it, and some were born during the journey and did not know their routes. With GPS, the Israelites could have completed their journey in a day, but alas, they went on the least direct route to find themselves. My journey with the koan has been both short and long. It has hardly begun. I was lost most of the time, and barring delusions, lost all the time. I saw a lot of the old me trying to figure it out, like it was a logic or math problem. I had a fixed view from the start. The fixed view included such ideas that Buddha thought hard about how he'd pick a successor, that the monks who didn't smile were confused and then disappointed, that Kashaba was smiling at Buddha's cleverness at not talking but saying so much, and on and on and on. The woman across the street yells into her phone sometimes, belittling someone at the other end. What stories I make up about that? Whoa, I say to myself, slow down, stop making assumptions. One would think that without assumptions, there is just a void. Actually, the opposite is true. When we draw from life, we try to see what is in front of us: form, light, color. If we put what we see on paper, we'll make an image that will resemble what is out there. As we put down what we feel, as I do in my drawings, the drawing won't be a mirror image of what is out there. When birds sing, they are not describing the world that they see, but rather they are connecting to other birds for one reason or another. They are making no assumptions. They are seeing who is out there and what they are up to. In the same way, in the koan, my current delusion is that there were simply two acts. Buddha picked up a flower from the ground and held it up. Likewise, Kashaba smiled when he glanced at the flower, the Buddha, and the flower. I believe that if we could have interviewed Kashaba and asked him why he smiled, we would have not heard a Dharma talk. He would just smile again, a subtle smile. And finally, I can see you guys. And I'm wondering if I see there's 6 chats, but are there any questions? So I had a trick. Maybe Nancy can unmute people. And I had a trick as a teacher with this question bit, because a lot of times we ask for questions, teachers ask for questions, but they don't really want questions, right? So I would say things like, Susan, do you have a question? And Susan is shaking her head no. And then what I'd say is, okay, Susan, I'll come back to you. Does someone have a question?
I have a comment.
Oh, sure. And Joel has a question. Thanks, Joel. But who said I have a comment?
Joan did.
Okay, Joan. What?
I really liked when you said, when there are no words, we make up a story. And I really liked it with the saying for the day about how silence is the best way. What was the saying? Best way of talking?
Silence is unceasing eloquence. It is the best language. Joel.
Thank you so much, Kim, for this. I will say, since my very first encounter with this story, I have hated it. I mean, the story of the Buddha holding up the flower, maybe the 80,000 monks were all studying up on what they should do and they wanted to be picked. But it always has hacked me off that there were people around the Buddha who devoted their lives to him and he passed them over. I talked to Flint about this one time, and Flint said, well, maybe he wanted somebody like Kashapa. The story tells how he would have wanted somebody like Kashapa who could set up a structure that would last and not just disappear, after 1 or 2 generations, something like that, which seems extremely again, that's always bugged me. But I just love the way you have, what do they call it? The Large Hadron Collider in Switzerland and France at CERN. The way you take the words and the way you take the images that they call up and the feelings that they call up and smash them together until you get smaller and smaller, more and more expressive bits out of them, that there's this is a beautiful talk.
It'll be fun to go 2 more months with this.
Yeah, I'm wondering what will happen next with that.
But I think I
But
need.
I want to say also that I have one reaction to something that you said fairly early in the talk. You were quoting from another teacher about, let me see if I got it right. Listen to everyone and believe no one.
Oh, yes.
Um, and my thought as you went along, I kind of reevaluated that, listening to what you said, and it was more like, listen to everyone and don't believe your thoughts about what they're saying necessarily. Question yourself about what you're believing, and that will make it more possible to actually hear what people are saying. Right?
Right.
Okay, that's my comment.
You know, that great saying, take it with a grain of salt. I think that's
Yeah.
Connie.
I love the X's at all the joints. They remind me of a merry-go-round on a playground, the ones that have the like, divided into 6 parts and you hop on someplace and then you feel the centrifugal forces. And it's like they're not deciding where it stops. They're just going with the flow. So your joints are what allow you to change directions. And I don't know, I like the correlation of the playfulness and the image of it spinning around and it just being the flow of things, helping you decide which way you'll go next instead of always trying to figure it out. I like the X's at the joints.
So where I think the X's come from is my favorite painting teacher talked about the paper as a skin, and that you have to tie the drawing to the skin. It can't just float on top. And the X's is kind of like punching. And in my work, I do use a lot of staples, not in these pieces, but I've been using staples for 50 years. And staples are kind of attaching the drawing to the skin. It's not just an illusion, a drawing. It's actually a physical object. So the X kind of
Between the different realms.
connects it.
Fun.
But this thing that the artist doesn't know. The artist is not the best expert in their work. The artist makes things up so anyway, you can't believe that either, what I just said. Exactly. That's how it's feeling now, that the X's connect them, but I don't remember. But when I first was sitting, my knees certainly hurt too. But we all have that experience. So there's that connection too. But I think I did X's before I sat. I saw someone else raise their hand. Oh, Rosemary.
Hi. I like the idea that the 80,000 monks, their preparedness got in the way of transmission. I thought that was.
I know you're a therapist, and my sister would tell me the story that people going to a tutor to train to take the boards to be a therapist, that happened in your neck of the woods. But anyway, the first time they go to the tutor and go through a course, they usually fail because they're too prepared. And then it takes the second or third time before they can, this is in California at least, before they can actually pass, because it's more integrated into their being rather than knowing just, being taught the right reaction, the right thing to do. Does that make sense?
It wasn't my experience, what you just said, but I can certainly say that practice itself, is how you learn and how they're healed. It's just, it's the transmission back and forth all the time. Thanks.
Yeah, Darcy.
So I think of all the quotes, you gave so many great quotes from different folks, but I think my favorite, I think maybe it's a quote from you directly, you tell me, is that I am somewhere between being lost and being entertained. That was my favorite. And it feels very much like you in that, like being lost, and that's one end of the extreme of being in your head and frustrated, and the other hand, and you still haven't figured it out, but you've surrendered, and we're always somewhere in between. I love that one. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes.
Okay, well, I think what we'll do now is we'll have service. But thank you all for your attention. And Susan, I'm going to ask you someday what your question is, so you're not off completely.